Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Adult Music, a special episode of Adult Music where we'll be talking to the conductor of the Boston Modern Orchestra Project, Gil Rose. Gil Rose, welcome to Adult Music.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's good to meet you. So you're in Boston at the moment.
I am in rainy Boston at the moment.
Rainy Boston.
Yes.
It's really funny. It's raining here too. We've had really torrential rains this week.
We had a heat wave earlier this week, and then the temperature dropped and the rains came.
Oh boy. Okay. Is it hot there yet? I used to live in Boston long ago.
It was super hot this week. Got up near 100, and now it's in the 60s, which is typical of Boston. The temperature's up, temperature's down.
Wow. Oh boy. Let me ask you before we start talking about the BMOP. Has the orchestra been performing recently? Are people coming back?
Well, no, actually, the last performance we did, public performance we did, was February of 20. So we haven't had a public performance in 17 months. But we recently, a couple weeks ago, spent 4 days together recording. So we have reassembled, but not in public.
Yeah, it seems like you've been doing actually a lot of recording.
Well, we've been doing a lot of releasing of recordings, but we just started again doing the actual recording sessions themselves.
Okay, well, I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let me just kind of get back to the beginning here. Tell me about just first of all your. Let's just start with you yourself. How did you? It says here in my my Wikipedia research, to coin an oxymoron, that you were born in Pittsburgh and you got your bachelor's in music at the University of Cincinnati. Tell me first of all about your early life and how you got into music.
Well, I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, kind of the corner, the left low corner of Pennsylvania, bordered by West Virginia on three sides, both geographically and socially and structurally. But I got involved in music like a lot of American kids do of my generation. I started playing in the instrumental program in the elementary school, and then played in the junior and senior high school bands, and became enamored of all musics, and just it went from there. And then I went to pursue music education, which was not something that normally happened in the school I came from. It was not it was a nice high school music program, but it wasn't anything like a special music program or any concentrated music program. But I started out as a undergraduate in the conservatory at the University of Cincinnati, and I didn't know what I wanted to be. I thought I maybe wanted to be a clarinetist. I thought maybe I'd be a composer. I thought I might be a musicologist. I bounced around between. I thought I would be an art history major at one point, and then I finally graduated, I think, if I remember correctly, with a music history degree and several minors. But I've
got one of those.
Yeah, right. I think I was always sort of focused on ultimately conducting. I think all the other things I was doing were preparation for studying conducting, but I didn't do that as an undergraduate. But then I went home to my hometown in Pittsburgh and went to graduate school at Carnegie Mellon University, and that's where I started my conducting studies, and finished there and moved to Europe to seek my fame and fortune, and didn't really find either.
I don't know about that. Well, after this podcast, it's all going to change.
Maybe it should have happened earlier. Anyway, I moved back to the States, relocated in Boston, and I've lived here ever since.
All right. So your instrument was the clarinet when you were
it was rumored, yes. Yes. Often forgotten, but still remembered. No, Yes, I was just like all the minors and all the various things I was dabbling in. I was playing all sorts of woodwind instruments, including saxophone, and I was what they would classically call a doubler.
Right.
Played all of them fairly well, none of them really well.
Right. Well, how did that start? Did you get into? Were you from a musical family, or did you just happen to like music?
Well, yes and no. I mean, my father's family had a long history with music. Well, I had an uncle who tried to be a professional trumpet player and then ended up working as an engineer. But no, my father loved music, and his family was very much in the home. They all played instruments, and this was back in the 30s and 40s, and they would gather on Sunday afternoon and just make music. I don't know quite how they did that. Quite an array of various instruments that don't usually think of going together, but that was part of their family activity. And my father just always loved music, though he wasn't an expert in any sense, but he loved singing and listening to music. My mother's family, as they say in France, she couldn't carry a tune in a saucepan. But they were very supportive of my desire to do it. And they never tried to convince me to be a doctor or a lawyer or anything like that. They just knew that I loved doing it. I have a son who's an aspiring jazz musician, and I've been put in and he's just in college now. And I've been put in my father's shoes because I wanted to advise him the tough road he was about to hoe. And he did, but never asked him to do anything but what he loved.
Right. Okay. What's his name?
His name's Coleman Rose.
Okay.
When I named him Coleman, it was a sign of things to come because of he's a tenor sax player. So
so you got Coleman Hawkins, George Coleman, and
Ornette Coleman. There was a lot of.
It's a loaded name. Yeah.
It's a loaded name.
Carries it along. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll certainly look out for him. So I wanted to, now that I got his name in mind there.
He's pretty. I think you will hear of him. He's a talented kid and loves what he's doing.
Great.
Okay, well, Boston, which is where you are now, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. How did you wind up there? My alma mater, by the way, Boston University. I went there for my undergraduate degree. So how did you wind up there?
I was living, I said I went to Europe to pursue my fame and fortune, and also a girl who then became my wife. And we were living in Geneva, Switzerland. And we wanted to relocate. She was French. She's now my ex-wife, but still my good friend. Right. And we wanted to relocate back to the U.S. For various reasons, and we picked Boston as a place where both of our professional, aspirations could flourish. So, and then we ended up here. Okay,
and you started the Boston Modern Orchestra Project?
I started the Boston Modern Orchestra Project, which is a lot to say, too many words, and they're too long. So we call it by its acronym. Some people say BMOP, but we just say BMOP.
BMOP.
Which everybody in town and a lot of people nationally and internationally know it as that. That was in 1996. We played our first concert.
Okay, in 1996?
Yeah.
Right. Wow. Okay. I was already gone by that. It's too bad. I would have definitely gone to see
you
this.
would have enjoyed that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm looking at the, you also have a, the Boston Modern Orchestra, the Boston Modern Orchestra Project, or BMOP, also has a, records for the record label BMOP Sound. So you have your own record label. Can you tell us about that?
Well, early on I was always very interested in, recordings, avid
us too.
Yeah, I can see the boxes behind you guys. Yeah, I'm wondering.
Right. These are all CDs.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. So it was always something I was involved with as a listener, and I thought the kind of music that the orchestra was playing was often pieces that weren't recorded, and we started making recordings, and then we put some out on other labels. Our first CD was on Naxos, and we had a couple titles on New World and on Chandos and a variety of labels, and we realized that we were doing all the work to make the recordings and the CDs, and then just sort of licensing them to other companies. So we decided all we needed really was a UPC code and some kind of distribution network, and we could do it all ourselves. And we did. We just released our, I think our 81st and 82nd CD. And they're coming out fairly regularly now, because that's one of the things we have been able to do during COVID, was since we haven't been able to perform, we've been working on getting the backlog of recordings released.
Yeah, I was wondering, because I was just looking at, you said you're in the 80s as far as number of releases. When I was doing the research. Yeah, I was overwhelmed by the sheer amount of recordings that are on this label.
Sometimes I look at it and I'm amazed. Yeah, but they all were labors of love, and they're all composer-centric CDs. So we are on a few CDs on other labels that have mixed composers or mixed ensembles, but on our label it's all us playing all of a composer on a CD. So they're all sort of composer profiles, as it were.
Now, it seems like they're all also SACD, Super Audio CD. Is that the case? All of them?
Not all of them, but after the first, dozen or so, we're just in stereo format. And then I was being an audiophile myself. Yeah. Like the SACD 5.1 format, so we started recording in it. I think for us it's been a very good thing, because there's not all that many aficionados of the kind of repertoire we record, but there are a lot of audiophiles. So I think our titles get attention from people interested in new and recently new music, as well as people interested in the audiophile experience. So we're just working on a title, first thing that'll be done in Atmos.
Wow.
So yeah, that's a whole new world.
I don't have that kind of equipment. So.
Yeah, not many people do, but the ones that do will get, they're interested in whatever they can find in the house.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what an orchestral recording would sound like in that format.
Yeah. We're trying to figure it out. It takes a little getting used to. But anyway, we're trying to stay connected to the audiophile listener as well as the music listener.
Yeah, that's
fantastic.
Great. I think, that's where SACD really can bring the benefit with the spatial characteristics of orchestral music. Yeah. And, now that everything seems to be going the other way with convenience for streaming, it's really nice that, some labels and some groups are sticking with, especially the SACD thing. So that's a nice thing to see.
Yeah, I think that every title we've done, there's been a few stereo titles in the middle because for some reason we didn't record it in surround. But I think going forward, everything will continue to be SACD until maybe there's a format change, and we'll see that.
Yeah, who knows what's next, right? But,
I like that format. I'm glad that that's still
me too.
Available.
I like it, and the dual layer makes it perfect, because people who just have stereo can have stereo.
Sure.
Right. It's just a nice warm sound as well. It's kind of, the high sampling rate and that
we
sort
have
of
some
thing.
good venues we record in, and we can really take advantage of the acoustic. Can you hear my dog in the back?
Yeah, that's okay. Tell me about the venues. Where do you record specifically? And have you figured out the sound in the hall and how to record it?
Right. We have. We've kind of got it down in the two main halls we record in are Jordan Hall at New England Conservatory, which, for your listeners who don't know it, it's about a 1,000-seat hall. Right. It's worth taking a look online and looking at it. It's quite beautifully shaped. The very high ceiling in the hall, and the sort of like an oval shape. It makes for, especially if we're using between, like, say, 25 and 60 players, it's a really great venue for that. It's got a very clean sound, but warmth at the same time. It's a nice combination of the kind of sound I like. And then the other hall we use for even bigger things is Mechanics Hall in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is a world-class acoustic in the middle of what used to be a big town in central Massachusetts.
Right.
But it's a big hall that was built just after the Civil War, actually, to host big choral festivals. And it's got a fabulous acoustic. I mean, a lot of audio editing and mastering softwares. You can apply the acoustic of any given hall. Like you can take your recording from Jordan Hall and apply the Berlin Philharmonie, and it gives the characteristics of that acoustic. The Mechanics Hall is on all those programs. It's a great place to record. Like I said, we were just out there a couple weeks ago doing 4 days of sessions. So those are our main halls. If we do smaller things, sometimes there's other halls we use, but I would say 90% of our recordings are in those two halls.
Okay. So the BMOP, the Boston Modern Orchestra Project, these recordings seem to be exclusively of American composers. Is that the case?
Well, almost exclusively. It wasn't designed that way. It just sort of turned out that way. We have one title, which is sort of timely. Early on, we did a CD with Louis Andriessen, who just passed away yesterday.
Right, yeah.
So I think Louis is maybe he's the only non-American we have on our label. We have some other recordings of other things on other labels that aren't not American composers. But yeah, we've sort of become, I don't know if you guys remember, or your listeners remember, the series of recordings that were made in Louisville, Kentucky, the Louisville First Edition recordings. It was a recording program that ran, I don't know, must have started in the late 50s, ran through the mid 70s, maybe up until 1980. The Philharmonic Orchestra in Louisville, Kentucky, made this series of recordings called the First Edition Records. And they commissioned most of the pieces they recorded. And it was an interesting, a lot of interesting great repertoire came out of that effort. I think it helped the orchestra in what is really I think Louisville's the biggest city in Kentucky, but that's not saying that much. And I think that helped the orchestra give themselves a special identity, which they then became a sort of a national identity. They through the activity of doing new music and commissioning stuff and then recording it and distributing under their own mark. I think it really was an important moment for them as an institution, but it also helped them raise money and create projects even outside of the confines of Louisville, Kentucky, which, you know, there's not enough composers there to do that project, but they became a national thing. And in some ways, BMOP sound is a little bit like that.
Okay. Can you give me an idea? I don't know that I'm familiar with that project, but what you said that they had commissioned a lot of the works that were recorded. Can you give me an example of some of the works that they commissioned?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, they commissioned just about everybody. Established composers like, let's see, I'm trying to remember some of them. People who are still around today, like Ellen Zwilich was one of the composers. I mean, the list is John Harbison, Mara Davidovsky. It goes on and on. And you name an American composer, either a natural born or who had immigrated to the country in that period, and the odds are they at least had one piece commissioned and then premiered and recorded by the Louisville. I think it's the Louisville Symphony, but it was the Louisville First Edition recordings. Yeah. Then they re-released a lot of those. They used to do something that we don't do. They would do any one of they were on LPs, of course. So the length wasn't as long. So they would usually have 2 compositions or 3, and they would have different composers. So they weren't composer profiles. They were just 3 pieces that they did, which was more the fashion back then anyways. Right. And recently they've combined, like if they commissioned Carlos Suranak to write 3 things over 10, 12 years that were on 3 different LPs, they've put them together on CDs as composer profiles, and they're still out there, and they were re-released, and they're definitely some fabulous repertoire there by composers that have sort of, a lot of them have faded from common knowledge and view. So that's great that material's out there.
Yeah, having grown up in America, for both of us, we're familiar with some of these composers that a lot of the rest of the world doesn't know about.
Right.
And looking at this, the BMOP project, there are a lot of composers whose names I remember from back in the day whose aren't really that well known.
Yeah, sometimes people fade for reasons and pieces fade, reasons that aren't always explicable, and that's sort of why we're here to perform them, pull them out of mothballs, and record them so that they don't get forgotten and they're part of the canon. As much as we can influence that.
I wanted to ask you, with an orchestra that performs, exclusively or with a strong focus on these sort of modern works, what's the demographic of your audience when you have live performances? Is it different from the normal classical listening audience? Does it tend to be younger or a certain type of people?
Well, that's been a question we've been asking for 20 plus years. It's funny, our demographic. It's best word I can use to describe it is people who are interested in eclectic things. It doesn't break down by age or by economic level or social interaction. It seems to be just people that have an interest in things they wouldn't normally hear at established, like at the Boston Symphony Orchestra.
That's very cool, because I just, having been interacting internationally for a few decades now and comparing with my own American background, I find this sort of openness, eclectic nature to be more of a European type of thing. Whereas, Europeans tonight will go to the opera, and maybe the next night is the jazz club, and we'll check out our favorite rock band. Whereas Americans tend to be, sort of streamlined.
They're much more in silos. Yeah.
If you can attract, that kind of audience that's open to a lot of things, I think, that's a really interesting achievement and a cool group of people to have.
It is. And a lot of our concerts are a little bit the opposite of our recordings. So our recordings being composer-centric, our concerts tend to be themed concerts. I was always interested in programming things that had some unifying theme but showed different aspects of that theme. So our concerts have been based on, by doing new and 20th century music, we get a lot of potential to interact with all sorts of ideas outside of the normal classical concert, symphony, concerto, overture format. So we've done many themes around indigenous music's influences or national music's influences. We've done concerts that involve Japanese music influences, or even we did a concert of Canadian composers, if you can wrap your head around that. We called it True North. But
that's a good title.
Yeah, that's good.
They come to you, but sometimes you have to fight for them. But there have also been things about technology or about extra musical ideas, just to unify the concerts. And then the concerts are often serve as a setup for making the recordings.
I see. Okay,
interesting.
So when you program these concerts, do you find that you have to include some sort of popular work in there in order to draw the audience, or does your audience just? In the first years, I did that always. I know, and popular is sort of a relative term, but I would always put a known piece, in with lesser known pieces. As the orchestra has become more established and has a little bit more leeway, I didn't have to do that as much, but I've sort of gotten back to it actually, because I always make the joke, and I guess it hits a little close to home, but I always say I should be in the Guinness Book of World Records as the conductor who conducted the most pieces once. that sounds like a rough. No.
It's a burden to bear, I can tell you. But no, I've got to do an amazing amount of music, and but I very seldom get to do pieces twice. And so as the group has gotten on in years and established itself, I've gotten back into like putting some, 20th century quote unquote masterworks back on the program. If I can, if they fit the theme, or I can work them in, that's, that helps also contextualize the things people haven't heard before.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So,
okay. Let me see. I think what I was really asking there too is, so do you feel like you need to draw your audience, or by now do you have like people who just come to hear you just because it's they know what you're going to do? Or,
I think that mostly our audience has become our BMOP audience in a sense, and they've taken enough risks with us, and they generally come out of them feeling rewarded, that they're trusting in what we're programming, even if they don't know it. I used to have a concert goer, and he was a supporter of the organization, who always said he would come to a concert and there'd be 4 pieces. One he would love, one he would absolutely hate, one would intrigue him to listen to more, and one he usually didn't understand at all.
That sounds like every great concert I've ever heard.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So that was, I took that as a compliment, especially the part about not liking one of them.
Right.
Right. Yeah, you think you have to push yourself. We often say, like, there was Otto Carroll, he was a British music teacher and things like that. And he used to say that when it comes to music, you should never say, I know what I like. He said, I don't know what I could like. So you're really sort of pushing yourself.
Yeah.
I thought that was that quote stuck in my mind.
Well, I think that getting back to the audience, I mean, I think there's just people who've had, and I always say when somebody says, you want to go to the concert and hear Beethoven 7, I always say, well, I know how it ends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is that.
And I mean, I just recently did a cycle of Beethoven symphonies with a festival I used to run in New Hampshire, but that's the thing about it, is that when you keep hearing the same pieces over and over again, it stops being about the piece.
Right.
And starts being about the performance. And then it either has to be about how quirky the performance is or how perfect it is.
Right.
And that's been a sort of a negative drag on programming and creative thinking in the symphony and opera world. It became about the performance, not about the composition. And that's not healthy.
Yeah.
Not healthy for making more music go forward. Anyways, it might be healthy for the bottom line for a short time, but ultimately it's not a sustainable model.
Right. I think of the days before Mendelssohn, when he started reintroducing Bach's works and started coming up with a repertoire, all music was new. You would just go and hear
It's funny that you break that example, because I just had this discussion with somebody the other day. When I started BMOP, it wasn't really about new music. Right. It was more about trying to understand or recreate the structural model for making concerts that Beethoven used. Beethoven only did concerts when he had something new to do.
Right.
Mendelssohn's a different story because of the Bach revival and everything, but Beethoven had to write pieces that would engage his audience, because he required the ticket revenue to make the whole thing work out. And it often did not work out. But that was the model that I thought that we had lost, that we were not creating a triangle between the performer, the creator or composer, and the audience. And that we had the modern American orchestral structure had lost that connection. And it had become about something different. It was about preserving and not even, I wouldn't say preserving, it was about preserving a limited number of special objects.
Right.
And I thought that just was really boring to me. So, there are enough people that agree with me that it is boring, and they want something else to keep us, thriving and
right.
surviving.
Yeah, as an audience member, I sort of want everything. I want all that stuff, but I want more. I want the new stuff too.
Yeah, and sometimes people think I'm dissing the great masterworks, which I am in no way, shape, or form doing. I think we diminish them if we put them in a vacuum and don't see them in relationship to even things that admittedly are not masterworks. They become more interesting if they're seen in the context of everything that was around them, whether it's as good, almost as good, not near as good, but still good. The Beethoven 7 becomes more interesting if you know about score.
Right.
Or whoever.
But even music like Spohr, people might say it's...
I had no idea that we were going to talk about Spohr in this conversation.
well, we're not really, but you brought it up. I'm just folling up.
We could also talk about Tartini if you'd like.
Oh, I like Tartini too, those solo violin works. But the thing I want to say about Spohr or any of these relatively unknown composers is that when you hear their music today, it's gained from its age. I feel like it's kind of the patina of time and of the musical language that it uses becomes really appealing to us now, even though it's not considered the peak of that music of that period.
I often will dig into projects to listen to things that I know exist or names that I know exist, but I don't really know the pieces. And that's what good recording labels and ones that are surviving and thriving now are actually much more involved in boutique repertoire than they are in the standards. You look at, Chandos or CPO or Channel or even Naxos. It's all encompassing way. They're helping you get a greater, much more mosaic picture of what the music is. Now, the Beethoven in that period, sticking with the Beethoven example, those symphonies in that mosaic stand out as bigger pieces. But if you look at a mosaic, the smaller pieces have interest too, and they inform the big pieces.
Right.
And I think that's what we're talking about. So in our way with BMOP, we're trying to do sort of the same thing. And we've gravitated towards American music written in the last 100 years.
Right. Okay. And speaking of that, we may as well get to that right now. Now, I was looking at this list of over 80 recordings. I decided to zero in on the last releases from the last 2 years since we were all locked down. And I was looking at some of the composers here. Some familiar to me from college: Gunther Schuller, Harold Shapiro. I remember having a recording on New World conducted by Andre Previn, of all people.
Right. The Symphony for Classical Orchestra.
Right. Okay, and John Harbison, who I first learned about when I worked at NPR over at WBUR a long time ago, and Norman Dello Gioia. Now, I heard this opera for the first time in the performance. It was nominated for a Grammy this year, and I listened to it we did a Grammy episode, and I was rather delightfully surprised by it. I didn't really...
Norman's a good example of what we do. I never knew Norman Dello Gioia, but I always knew of him. He taught at BU, your alma mater. Oh. And, if you'd have mentioned Norman's name in the late 60s or early 70s, he would have been in the 10 most prominent American composers of the time. Now, everybody's forgotten. And he Pulitzer Prize winner. He's one of those composers whose music has faded. And I got interested in that piece because it's funny about Wikipedia. You can go down some real rabbit holes or
sure
Google searches in general. But if you're like a repertoire wonk and you're interested in repertoire and composers, you just need a starting breadcrumb and then you can really follow it down some paths. But I was actually, that piece is called The Trial at Rouen. And Norman Gioia, over the course of his life, wrote basically one opera, but in 3 different versions. And they were all the story of Joan of Arc.
Right.
The first one was with John. The second one was an adaptation, which is this piece we're talking about, The Trial at Rouen. It was written for the NBC Opera Theater. And NBC television used to commission operas. Many famous ones we know. Probably the most famous Christmas opera, Menotti's Amal and the Night Visitors, was written for television.
Right.
And so the piece, the Trial of Rowene, was one of those versions. So it's only like 80 minutes long. It was designed for like an hour and a half broadcast. And after that, he revised it again for a bigger full-length evening opera called The Triumph of St. Joan. Mm-hmm. And then he extracted a symphony from it, from the opera, like a suite. And I was looking for operas that were inspired by Joan of Arc's story. And I hit that Norman Del Gioio thing, and I remembered clearly in my mind as a young guy in some high school band festival playing a Norman Del Gioio band piece. And then I went down the rabbit hole, and I realized that this was an important American neoclassicist who had just fallen off the map.
Yeah, it seems like there are. I think there are a lot of those. I remember I like John Harbison's music a lot.
Who's that?
John Harbison.
Yeah, well, John's still with us and hasn't fallen off the map in Boston.
Right.
But there's a laundry list of recordings I'd still like to make by composers I haven't even touched yet.
Can you tell us some of them?
Yeah, I have a project I want to do. Of like all projects, they only exist if they can be financed. But so if any of your listeners are out there have an interest in the music of Alexei Hayev, Alexei Hayev was one of what was called the Second Boston School. So those were composers like Harold Shapiro, Irving Fine, Lucas Voss, Alexei Hayev, and there were Louise Talma was one of them too. So those composers, they were sort of neoclassicists that bridged the world. Arthur Berger was one of them also. They sort of bridged the world between Copland, Schoenberg, and Stravinsky. They were like at the Venn diagram of those three composers was the Second Boston, what's called the Second Boston School. And those composers have always been of great interest to me. I have a fascination with composers. Some of them were academic composers who have, were very well known at 20, 30, 40 years ago, but have been like sort of relegated off the page. Karel Husa or Rossley Finney, people who taught at Michigan, people who taught. The list is endless. It goes on, and they're all being left behind in a way.
Yeah, when you said that.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. You keep talking.
I was just going to say that it seems that one of the things about the way we think about music now is we like the old and the really new. The new thing that got up on social media and somebody promoted and that's flashy and has internet savvy built into it, but we forget our recent past at our own peril, I think. So
now, when you say that, do you mean Americans, or do you mean just people in general who listen to this music?
Well, people in general, I think, are sort of go that way. But Americans, I think, are even worse at it.
I think so. I sort of tend to agree.
Yeah, they're short attention spans, and they're really quick to not do their homework. They like to be fed what they're supposed to like, and the journey is not so important for them. They like the arrival. This is all getting quite philosophical, but
just as well.
But I think that's that's what we do and what we're known for, and it's what gets me out of bed every morning.
Okay, now you had spoken about academic composers, and the question, the name that came to mind right away for me was Walter Piston, and you've just released a new album of his music.
A Piston. I'm trying to, one of the things I want to do with this label as it approaches its 100th release is to have really represented every major American composer as best I can. And there's a few notches on that belt that need to be notched, and Walter Piston was one of them. That Piston CD, which just came out, has a piece. So most of Piston's symphonic music was recorded some time or other. But it has a piece, an early piece of his, which is a very short but punchy Concerto for Orchestra, which had never been recorded.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this one, because this one really struck me. When I saw that it was a premiere recording, I was like, how can that be? Because, and I thought, as an example of very accessible 20th century music that, even people with a passing interest in classical music would be drawn into. This really struck me. And I was a trumpet player and played in orchestras, and this composition has fabulous brass, parts in it, and it really pulls you in. But yet the movements are really short. I mean, they're over just when you get into them, and even for people who don't have a long attention span for movements. But the arc of it is very satisfying. And especially the final the adagio movement, it really satisfies. And I thought, this is a fabulous piece. I just couldn't believe that no one who had performed this in the past thought this needs to be recorded, because I thought this is a great piece. And for a live program with all modern music, I thought this is great. I guess you like it as much as
I like
I'm
it too.
describing it.
It's early Piston, and I like it because it's exactly what you said. It gets to the point, and I think it's 23 minutes or something, or maybe even 21 minutes. But it does, in those 21 minutes, he does what you should do in a concerto for orchestra. He features every part of the orchestra, gives a lot of solo prominence here and there. And it doesn't mess around. And it would be a great, it could be a concert opener, but it's a good concert ender, I think. Yeah, especially if you have a two-piece second half, two 20-minute pieces or two 25-minute pieces. This would be a great concert ender. And I was surprised that it had never been recorded. In fact, I was so surprised that I did extra research to make sure it really had never been recorded before I slapped the world premiere recording on the cover of the CD.
Right.
Yeah. I really like the sound on this too. Thank you. Recording on it just, I played it on my big system, and then it was just, filling the room, and I was like, oh, this is great. And the contrast, it's got, like you say, it's got everything, the string and woodwind figures that come through in the first movement, the stately movement come in, and then that huge low brass finish, it comes out really thickly. And I was like, oh, this is, I really like this. And it was the idea that it was new to, to everyone as a recording, that made it all the more appealing.
That's Mechanics Hall. There's two things making that sound. Mechanics Hall is one of them. Our engineer, Joel Gordon, is another one of them. And the third one is that Walter Piston knew how to write for orchestra. That's something that's another thing that I think is really important about our mission, whether it's using an unknown piece by Piston or, a new piece by somebody like Andrew Norman or Mason Bates. Because orchestras don't play so much contemporary music, composers have often not been able to hone their skills writing for the orchestra and having those chops to make an orchestra. I always say make an orchestra sound. And we've been involved in a lot of commissioning projects. And, these days, younger composers or mid-career composers often are relegated to writing what I call the snappy new music opener. An innocuous 6-minute piece that the orchestras can say they commissioned a new music piece, but they don't want it to come as the major piece the second half because everybody will leave an intermission after the Brahms piano concerto. But we've been engaged in an effort to try to commission younger composers to write substantial orchestra pieces, 35, 45-minute pieces that use big orchestra when we can do it. And some of them have been quite recognized. Two of them that we commissioned recently won Grawemeyer Awards, which is like the Pulitzer, but with more money. And we've had candidates for runners up for the Pulitzer, and I think to invest in the next generation of composers that can write for the orchestra and take writing for the orchestra as a serious as that being part of an evolution and a tradition of knowing how to write for the orchestra. And I find that that's a skill that is fading quickly amongst composers. And it's easy to mix a CD by a composer like Piston because he knew how to make the orchestra sound. You don't have to do a lot of mixing with it. You just really just have to let it go and let the orchestra and the composer in the hall do their work, and it sounds.
Yeah, my life as a listener has been I've seen Piston go from because he's really when I was younger he was most famous for his harmony textbook, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
And I had never heard any of his music, and then the Naxos label started putting some of it out. I have a few of those recordings, and now BMOP's new release, and he sounds like he was a fantastic orchestrator and
very meticulous. This word craft has taken on a sort of a negative connotation, which I don't think it should. It seems to imply to some people that if your music has great skill and craft, it's also dry and academic, and maybe might also have some social implications in this day and age. But how could we not admire excellence and skill and craft? It doesn't apply to just academic music. It applies to jazz. It applies to world music. It applies to every kind of music. It's either done with skill and craft, or it's done not without skill and craft. The craft, how the craft is passed down in different cultures. Sometimes it's written, like in Walter Piston's harmony book, or sometimes it's oral, as in a lot of quote unquote non-Western music traditions, but it's still skill and it's still craft. And those composers who have that ability, for orchestra composers, I find that they compose with their ears, and the ones that don't have that ability compose with their eyes.
Yeah, I think to me, like as someone who likes a variety of music, and then when I focus on classical music, the most important thing that draws me in is someone who knows how to use the palette of colors and all the instrument voices, the timbres in a setting that, does the most with it. And that's as important as what's being said with the material. So when I hear something new for the first time, or something that's a little bit outside of my comfort zone, if it's a composer who has, utilized the sections to their greatest advantage, I will be more tolerant of hearing things that I'm uncomfortable with. And I felt with that, Piston piece, I was ready for anything that he would do, just of the, beauty of the voicings and the integration of the parts. And I thought, wow, this is a really great piece I could play for other people who say, I don't like modern, classical music. Oh, you're going to like this.
Tchaikovsky, they don't like anything past Tchaikovsky. Yeah. That's sort of the tipping point for people. I think your point is well taken, and that, the orchestra is the biggest box of colored crayons that the world, auditory colored crayons that the world ever invented. And so, I love people that know how to use it and use it in subtle ways. So that's always a thrill.
Yeah, I worry because growing up listening to music, and then my ear was attuned, I can hear from a young age, that's an oboe, that's an English horn. I could hear the differences, and that's what brought the colors out to me. And so when I play music or talk with young people and they don't hear these, difference in the shades of timbre and instruments, I wonder what it looks like, if it's almost like being colorblind or something. It makes me kind of sad.
I think it's a little bit of a result of the way people compose now too, because the revolution in software that allows people to use Score or Sibelius or whatever they're using is not the same as sitting down with pen and paper and, writing the lines out and actually contemplating the sound of the combined instruments.
Right.
And I think there's a bit of a process in speed. It advances the speed, but I'm not so sure it's ultimately good composing that way. Now, getting the parts in that kind of format is great, because
Sure.
I've worked through some manuscript parts in handwriting that I really didn't have a good time with. But I think that the automation of that kind of thinking and composing is what I say when people compose with their eyes instead of with their ears.
Right. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you about the Adams recording too, because this one was really interesting.
Another recent release we have to mention, by the way.
This was interesting to me in a different kind of way, because I had heard this piece before, and I thought, well, this is incredibly complex. And then when I read what Adams wrote about the sort of genesis of it, it's kind of a mix of Schoenberg and cartoon music. And he even describes it as like shockingly difficult to play. And there's so much going on with intricate rhythms, and then you've got that constant, the click of the drum set in there too. And I just wanted to get your perspective as the conductor of it. This must have been like really, really hard to keep in control, but yet also keep that playful sort of cartoonish thing in there while all those parts mesh there. And I thought that the whole effect at the end was really still playful. I thought, wow, that must have been hard to accomplish with all that stuff going on.
Well, it's that CD which has John Adams' 2 chamber symphonies and then a piece in the middle called Common Tones for Simple Time.
Right.
That's a unique CD for us because unlike almost all the other things we recorded, not all, but almost all, those pieces have been recorded. Mm-hmm. And the chamber symphony several times. And that's a little daunting because the other recordings made, the composer was the conductor. So I was up, up against the ur text, as it were. And John's a very good conductor. So, I wanted to do an Adams CD, and I picked those 2 pieces because the 2 chamber symphonies had never appeared on the same CD right. together. And I loved his first orchestra piece called Common Tones in Simple Time, because talk about coloring and understanding the shading of an orchestra. John's
and that's a nice palette cleanse between the 2 works.
Between the 2, right.
Yeah.
So, but it was daunting. And the thing about the first chamber symphony and the second chamber symphony, it's what I call symphoniette. It's basically one on a part, like 15 players. And when you're one on a part, there's no place to hide. And in John's music, there's no place to hide. It's crystal clear, and especially in that 15-player format. And John's music, in the chamber symphony especially, is wild, like you said, and there's polyrhythms, 3s on top of 2s on top of 7s, but with a driving beat underneath. Mm-hmm. So there's always a groove in that music. Yeah. And as soon as you get like the slightest bit out of the groove, it feels like a shopping cart with a bad wheel. It's going forward, but it's not right. And it can be only infinitesimally out of the groove, or what we call a pocket. And it just feels like you're driving a truck with a flat tire. So that was a tough CD to make for those reasons. The example of John's great recordings and trying to I didn't listen to the recordings while I was preparing to do the recordings, or even during editing, because I wanted to go from the score to make what I thought was the thing. And the performances are different than John's, and he and I talked about it, and he liked the different perspective. But those pieces are a real challenge, and I have to go shout out to my players who are just monsters. I mean, they're those fantastic players, and they took that on that recording, and we did both those pieces, the chamber symphonies, in probably half the amount of time that we should have allotted for them, but they got the job done. And it was a great result. I'm so very happy with it.
Yeah, and we recommend it as well. It's
it's
really
a lot.
good.
It's a lot of fun. Put that on when you're ready to be energized.
And it's got a Roadrunner on the cover. What could be better?
Nice cover art on there. Yeah.
I personally believe that the Warner Brothers cartoon music is one of America's great gifts to the world of music. Really, it's really special and unique.
I'll recommend I don't know if you can find it. It's probably used on eBay or something. But there's a great CD called the Carl Stallings Project. Carl Stalling wrote all the Putty Tat and Roadrunner cartoon music. But there's this fabulous CD of outtakes from the recording sessions of those.
That sounds funny.
He said, "Oh, it's a blast." And the players, in that day and age, if you wanted to make a living as an instrumentalist, you didn't play in them. I mean, if you really wanted to make money, you didn't play in a major symphony orchestra. You went to Hollywood and worked in the studios. So some of those people, men and women who played on those sessions were just, especially the woodwind players and the brass players too. And actually this percussion and string too, they all were monsters. And Carl just wrote the most fast and furious music for them. So yeah, people should look for it, the Carl Stalling Project. And
you had to conduct it while you were watching the screen too, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny. The first track on that CD is it's from a recording session, and you can hear Carl's voice, and he says, "Okay, Putty Tat Trouble, take one," and then you hear like I think it's probably a claves. You hear click, 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 so 4 times, and then bang, they explode into this music like, and it stops, and then you hear Carl say, "Okay, Putty Tat Trouble, take 2." like, and they do it like 3 times, and he says, "Okay, that was it," and then they move on. So,
oh wow,
yeah, I remember having a recording.
The last movement of the John's Chamber Symphony is a lot like Putty Tat Trouble.
Right. Yeah. Okay. There's one more recording that just got released that we haven't spoken about yet, and that's the Barber one. Can you tell us a little bit about the works on that? I've heard Knoxville Summer of 1915 before.
Right.
It's not recorded terribly often, but I really like this performance as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I like this performance a lot too. This month we released a Barber and a Piston CD at the same time, and that's sort of a tip of the hat to the old, as old a composer as we would probably do. But we have a couple coming out that are a little bit more senior than Piston even. But, it's just sort of an American Masters month. But the Barber CD has the very well-known and recorded Knoxville Summer of 1915. I like our performance a lot because of the soprano, Kristen Watson.
That's what struck me too. Yeah,
she's a beautiful singer, and I'm not impartial, so you can take it with a grain of salt. But what I love about that performance is I can understand all the words.
Yeah,
She delivers the text so elegantly and so thoughtfully and so well. The diction is so good. Because a lot of the recordings I've heard of it, I'm like, the text is so beautiful and so captivating.
Very moving.
Yeah, very captivating. And if you can really, one of the things I always strive for in all our recordings, whether they be opera recordings, the final marker for me is if they're sung and there's text, I want to hear the text. I want to be here without having to look at the libretto to say, what was that word? I didn't quite catch that, or to follow along. We've all gotten lazy because we listen to opera recordings in other languages, so we follow the librettos.
Right.
But when we listen in English, in our own, whatever language is our own language, I think for editing and mixing, my goal is always to have the text crystal clear. And Kristen, who sings that in Knoxville, made it easy because her diction and delivery are so fabulous. The other pieces on the CD are the original version of his ballet Medea, which he wrote for Martha Graham. We've made a small little cottage industry of recording. The Martha Graham commissioned tons of composers to write ballets for her. Some famous, some have faded from view also, but they're great pieces to do because they're She always got good composers. She always gave them a very dramatic subject, because Martha Graham only liked to dance dramatic subjects.
Right.
So this one is a Medea, which is a bloody, bloodthirsty tale, and he wrote it for what she always commissioned for, which was a small ensemble, usually of 15 or 17 players, because she wanted it to be mobile and not expensive to produce. So that's where we got, Appalachian Spring and Barber's Medea and any number, dozens and dozens of commissions from Martha Graham. That Barber later orchestrated that some of the movements from the ballet for full orchestra, and they get played in concert sometimes. One's called the Medea's Dance of Vengeance, I think is the title. But this is not the first recording of the complete ballet in its original form, but the only one I think that's available now, and certainly the only one in surround, and maybe the only one in digital too. And then the last piece on the CD is a little chamber opera he wrote called The Panda Bridge. Barber and Minotti and Lucas Foss, they all had a bet. They all bet each other they couldn't write operas under 11 minutes or something like that. So they each wrote a little mini opera, and this is Barber's mini opera. It's 4 characters and their internal secret thoughts during a game of bridge in what we assume is an Upper East Side apartment or something in New York in the late 50s. But they all live a little fantasy life while they're daydreaming, and you hear their private thoughts while the bridge game is being played out. And it all happens in 9.5 minutes or something.
Right. How was this originally performed? Was it on TV or was it for the stage? It's very short.
I think it was just part of an evening where they all ponied up these little operas, and they just ran them together. I performed it as part of a concert, and you just throw a card table up and 4 chairs and a deck of cards, and that's all you need. Inevitably, one of the singers' back is to the audience, which is a problem for staging it, but you can work around that. And
You
can make it like the Last Supper. You can have everybody facing.
Yeah, no, right. Well, I've seen it done in different ways, but it's usually combined with the other pieces that were written. One of them was a piece by Lucas Foss called Introductions and Goodbyes, and I think it's also 9 minutes. We actually have a recording of that that's going to come out with another Foss opera down the line. But that's just for one singer, and all he does is say hello to people entering a party and say goodbye to people leaving a party, all mixing a drink. It's a fun little piece. So I think they did it tongue-in-cheek. So Panda Bridge is a sort of tongue-in-cheek piece also.
Yeah, okay. Oh, just one more recording I want to talk about is the one that came out before the Adams was an Elliot Carter CD of 2 ballets. And I was really curious about that because it's not really the modernist Carter that we think about. They're very listenable. Can you tell us a little about those?
Early Carter, they're his only ballets. There were 2 of his early pieces. Pocahontas, the first ballet, I think is his first major substantial orchestra work. There may have been, there's something called the Holiday Overture. I think that may be before Pocahontas, but that's an interesting story and a very BMOP story. I always knew about Pocahontas because there had been a suite or a cut down version that was available on CRI, I think. So the full-length ballet Pocahontas is about 37 minutes, 35 minutes. The suite had cut out about 15 minutes of music and just, left some of the sections out. And that had been recorded and played. But doing a little research, I found out that missing 15 or 17 minutes of music had not been played since the ballet had been premiered, and it hadn't been recorded ever, naturally. And so I set out to try to put it all back together. And it took a little doing, but it wasn't too hard. The publisher was G. Schirmer, and they had the parts for the suite. So they were missing the orchestral parts for the missing music. And they had a manuscript of the full original score. So I just took it on myself and sort of figured out how it was originally stitched together. And we identified the parts that need to be copied out and added to the score, and parts were generated, and we made the recording. So in an odd sense, we did the second performance of Elliot Carter's first substantial orchestra piece and the world premiere recording of a full ballet.
Yeah.
So, and the stuff that got cut, you know, I have another career as an opera conductor, and where cutting things is you know, become the norm. You know, people will go into opera productions and say, I always tell directors, I would entertain cuts, but there has to be a reason for the cut, not a reason. They think of it the other way. There has to be a reason to add in, to actually do the music. So I'm like, no, you have to have a reason to do the cut, not a reason to do the music. The composer gave you the reason to do the music by writing it. But the music that was cut from the Carter ballet, Pocahontas, I'm not sure why it was cut. It wasn't that much music. And it was good music. I mean, it was actually, it advanced the arc of the piece, and it was, you know, gave some more contrasts to the music. So that was very much a kind of thing BMOP loves to do, is not only find a piece that's forgotten, but maybe even one that's needs a little putting back together.
Right.
And then get a kind of and world premiere performance in a sense, and recording. And we got a lot of press about that. New York Times wrote an article about it, and we added to it another piece, the Minotaur, which is full-length ballet that had been recorded, but they were a nice pairing, and it was Carter's Complete Ballets on one CD.
Yeah, nice program. So what do you have coming up? Is there going to be another release in 2 months, or?
There's going to be another release there's going to be a bunch of releases, actually, because one of the things, like as I said earlier, that while we haven't been able to perform in COVID, we had a backlog of a lot of recordings. And of course, COVID wreaked havoc on so many things. There were a few, I don't want to hesitate to say upsides, but there was an opportunity to take care of some things that I didn't have time for while we were making concerts. And
sure,
one of them was editing a backlog of CDs. So we have stuff coming out at a pretty good clip the next year, because I've had the chance during this 16, 17 months to really work on editing that was piling up.
Right.
So what's coming next? I almost should look at the list to get it right. But the very next thing is an opera we resurrected by a really forgotten American composer, Arnold Rosner, an opera called The Chronicle of Nine. After that is another John Harbison disc with Don Upshaw as the soloist on the CD. After that is an opera by Todd Mackover called Death and the Powers that we premiered in Monte Carlo 5-6 years ago, and the recording's finally coming out. That'll be one that's our first Atmos
yeah, I seem to recall Todd Mackover's music from the 80s or a long time ago, and it was I think it would it's well suited to that.
There's a whole lot of technology and
right.
and audio effects that'll be really it'll be great in surround, but it'll be even better in Atmos, I think. So
yeah, I think he was at MIT at the time doing some project.
Yeah, and then after that is a piece by the young American composer Matt O'Coin. Mm-hmm. His piano concerto and two pieces with voice and orchestra. That's October. November is another forgotten composer, Gail Kubik. Some of your listeners might remember a cartoon called Gerald McBoing Boing, which was about a boy. It was a Dr. Seuss cartoon, and Gil Kubik was a established Pulitzer Prize-winning composer who wrote the soundtrack for this famous narrative Dr. Seuss cartoon called Gerald McBoing Boing, and it also includes other pieces of his. The piece that he won the Pulitzer for, I forget what year, 1942, 47, I can't remember exactly, which was a symphony concertante For the oudist, it's basically a triple concerto, and the instruments are piano, trumpet, and viola.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's very strange. It was very hard. It's hard to balance that combination of instruments. But he won the Pulitzer for that sometime in the late 40s, I think. And this will be the world premiere recording of that. And a CD of music by Roger Reynolds. I mean, they're going to be coming out. We're going to try to release 12 or 13 CDs in the next year.
Wow. That's a lot.
Well, for a small organization, for a small company, a small organization with only 4 staff members, it's quite a, effort, but that's what we do.
Yeah, but we're glad to have it all. How about the BMOP? Are they going to be performing again soon? Do you have a date for?
Yeah, that's been an interesting thing. Here in Boston, a lot of the concert halls that we use, we primarily perform at Jordan Hall at the Conservatory, and sometimes we also perform at Sanders Theater at Harvard.
I remember Sanders Theater.
And both of those halls, because of COVID and because they're housed at universities or schools, they've been much more cautious about opening up, and because they have to, protect the student body. And they have a lot more moving parts than a regular commercial concert hall would be. So what's happened, it's been easier to program and plan for the 22-23 season than it has been for the 21-22 season.
Right.
So we know a few things, but we're still waiting on some possibilities about the Jordan Hall being a little bit more accessible to what we want to do. We are going to play, when COVID came, that was the season we were going to celebrate our 25th anniversary, and then COVID instead. So we're going to take our 25th anniversary events we had scheduled and sort of spread them out over 2 seasons while COVID sort of, ebbs and wanes from our daily life, hopefully. So we'll be playing a concert at Symphony Hall in Boston, at least 1, maybe 2 this year. We're launching a series of concert performances of operas by Black American composers. We'll be playing next year in 22-23. We'll play our Carnegie Hall debut. Mm. So there's stuff planned, just not stuff so much in the real immediate future, but we've tried to utilize take that time and get back into the recording studio, because that we can do.
Right.
We're all vaccinated and we can record together. It's the audience that's the complication.
All right.
Right.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we
I appreciate the chance to chat with you guys. People can just learn more about the orchestra and its recordings by just going to our label, our website, which is bmop.org. It just couldn't be simpler, bmop.org. And can see what's coming up.
Do you have any kind of a website or where people can contact you if we have listeners that want to know something about the project? They can actually
do it through the BMOP website.
Okay.
There's a email link for me there, and they can drop me a note.
Okay, we'll put the link up on the...
we'll put it with the podcast episode.
On the podcast episode.
And might be the general... I think it's the general email, but they can... the messages get to me. And, one of the things that happens, and this happens on social media or on our website, like-minded, what I call repertoire wonks, I think I used that expression earlier, they email me with ideas all the time. And I've learned quite a bit about composers I didn't know about. And a lot of the suggestions are great. I just, there's just not enough time and not enough money to do all that should be done.
Right.
Well, that's
I guess that's a truth for everything.
That's just an eternal truth. Yeah.
For everything, every aspiration. So, but it's a great pleasure to do it, and I feel like the orchestra and I do get to go along for the ride, but we get to make a unique contribution that we wouldn't get to do if we were, a regular symphony orchestra pursuing an agenda that most orchestras pursue. We're pursuing a very specific mission, and it's just an honor to be able to do it.
Yeah, it's great to be hearing all of this music, really for the first time for all of us. Well, thank you for joining us today, and it was a pleasure to talk to you.
All right. Well, you guys have a nice. Well, you don't have much evening left. It's probably morning there now.
Actually,
yes,
I think the new day just started.
New day started, but it's a good start for a day. And,
you do most of the interviews like this, morning in the U.S. and evening.
Yeah, or the reverse. We're in the morning and the
the other person will be in the evening. Europe is a little bit.
That's even trickier, really.
It's a little trickier,
right.
but
that's harder, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, great.
We'll have to interview a Japanese artist one day, so we could just do it
in the afternoon. Yeah.
How did you? I mean, what took you guys to Japan? I mean,
long story.
Well, we'll tell you all about that on your podcast when you invite us.
Yeah.
It's a long story.
Tables will be turned. Sounds good. Well, I love Japan. It's one of my favorite places to visit.
It's a good place for music. The Japanese are loyal fans of whatever music they're into, lifelong. Musical group, even pop groups that have been long forgotten in the States or elsewhere, they can come to Japan and their fans from 30 years ago will show up with a stack of albums to be signed.
No, when I conducted in Japan, it shocked me. I walked out the stage door and people were there with BMOP CDs, like in a stack, all organized with the Sharpie, ready to go.
Yep.
And it made it really easy, and they were very. It blew my mind.
Yeah, they're big fans of
Japanese are great collectors and fans, and they still like the physical media, and they have eclectic tastes in various things. And so, as a musician or music lover, the music stores are great, and for both instruments and for buying music, and there's a huge used music scene and other things. So it's an interesting environment for musical.
I just want to tell you a little story about when I first came to Japan in 1994. I lived up in Takasaki in Gumaken, and there was a guy there because they found out I liked classical music, and there was a guy there who had collected. CD was still a relatively new thing. It was 9 years old at about that time, and this one guy had collected. He had every CD of Baroque music released up to that time. It was unbelievable. It was like he had this whole room dedicated to these CDs, which were kind of like a new. They were 10 years old by then, but they were still sort of. It was overwhelming. I was like, man, that kind of was quite an introduction to Japan to see that. I certainly hope he hasn't kept that up.
Well, it's funny. We have distribution in Japan, and we get sales there. We're actually going into a new distribution arrangement with a different company that'll take over the Japanese distribution. But I would say we get past our normal kind of American Amazon sales or our, in-house sales. The UK and Japan are where we get the most sales. And I think a lot of it is the audiophile thing too.
Right.
I mean, they like the Elliot Carter CD. I mean, they might be like, we might not pick it up if it was a stereo CD, but if it's a surround, it might be enough impetus to buy the CD. And then, I think we're starting to get some brand loyalty too. So that's why it's been great to catch up on all this backlog.
Yeah.
Well, when you're in Japan, look us up.
I will.
We'll get some yakitori.
When I'm in Japan, I eat, and I do nothing but eat the whole time.
Our audience is split. The two largest segments are split kind of evenly between the U.S. and then Japan, and then the rest is very diverse around the globe. So for all of our listeners, now that Gil shared with us, this very interesting perspective and repertoire that the BMOP performs, please do check out this American classical music repertoire and history. We have got a lot of listeners in Europe, South America, and spread around Asia too. And
don't forget India; they're a big audience.
India is big too. Yeah. But do check out American classical music. Compared to Europe, we're much younger, but I think there's a lot of exciting music here that
we're an intensely musical culture, aren't we?
Yeah. So, So thanks again, Gil. This has been a great interview, and we appreciate your perspectives. We'll put this up. I think we're going to release it on Friday. That's when we do our special interview.
Yeah, generally Fridays.
So next Friday, and we'll include your links to the BMOP page. And
okay, that's fantastic. We'll look for it.
Yeah, the most recent releases too. At least the last.
Yeah, I'll put the links up for the recent releases on streaming.
The Barber, Piston, Adams, and I guess Carter as well.
And the Carter one too. Yeah.
Fabulous. All right, guys. Thanks.
Thank
you very much.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye now.
That was Gil Rose of the Boston Modern Orchestra Project. Their most recent 3 releases are Samuel Barber's Knoxville Summer of 1915, Medea and a Hand of Bridge, Walter Piston's Variations on a Theme by Edward Burlingame Hill, Divertimento for 9 instruments, Concerto for Clarinet and Orchestra, and Concerto for Orchestra, and John Adams' Chamber Symphony, Common Tones in Simple Time, and Son of Chamber Symphony.
Yeah, be sure to check them all out. They're all intriguing and have absolutely brilliant sound quality that you're going to enjoy on your fine system or headphones and be drawn into the music.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you with another interview very soon.